Chapter 12. In, Mateo thought. His lungs expanded with lush air. Out. Even in his controlled breaths, he found little stability, considering their reputation as a society that allowed their wives and children little exposure to violence. The crowd of landowners was an oddly even mix of female and male today. Witches milled in the seats in their elegant dresses and silk shirts, focused on the entrance to the tunnel at the bottom of the arena floor. Mateo stood in that stale tunnel that led to the jungle, out of sight thanks to a spell. For some reason, he couldn't face the landowners yet, not without letting his loathing for them show. One day soon, he'd have to be their leader. Today, he couldn't stand the sight of them. Romeo strode up from behind him and stopped. Mateo let the magic go. Romeo didn't spare him a glance when he said, "Are you prepared?" "How can either of us be?" A gong rang in the distance, an oddly keening sound. 4 more and this debacle would start. Silence fell on the arena. Outside, a voice resounded over the crowd. From where he was standing, Mateo struggled to make out the words, but he knew the voice right away. Balta, who would be head of Guardians if Hode wasn't so tight-fisted about his military power. Balta was the planner of this event, and he wouldn't hold back. Not with the military precision he'd used to carefully sculpt his career and his life. He'd prove out his next high priest with skill and tenacity. Whatever awaited them out there wouldn't be easy. Mateo's fingers ground together, the knuckles popping. He drew closer to the mouth of the tunnel to hear better. "The test of courage begins after the final bell," Balta declared. "Each contestant will seek out an elusive ghost panther and bring it back alive. Romeo's panther is marked with the blue cloth around its neck, Mateo's with yellow. They will each bring their assigned ghost panther back, unharmed, for inspection. Any magical interference will meet with execution. They have 1 full day to bring the panther back, or they forfeit the task and the throne." Nausea bloomed in Mateo's gut at the second gong. He chuckled, drawing an annoyed glance from Romeo. By any magical interference, Balta meant any magic at all. They could use no spells, no invisibility, no incantations. They had to not only survive an encounter with the massive, bloodthirsty beast, but bring it back alive, without magic. "Suicide," Romeo muttered. Ghost panthers were notoriously quiet, agile, and ruthless. When hungry, they stalked with relentless and silent precision. Ghost panther mares were especially violent. If a ghost panther whelp had ever been seen by a witch, none had survived to tell the tale. Did he imagine that Romeo looked pale? Mateo felt the loss of blood from his tingling fingers. Balta continued. "This test is meant to prove the candidate's bravery in the face of danger. Their ability to form a plan, remain calm, and execute said plan in spite of difficulty, danger, or unexpected twists. For what plan ever unfolds the way it should, even in politics?" A cheer rose from the crowd. Mateo felt sick all the way to his toes. "To guarantee compliance," Balta continued, using a spell to project his voice over the crowd, "we have placed a barrier around the edge of the arena that prevents the use of magic within. Any interference from the crowd will result in an immediate negation of the test and withdrawal of the assisted candidate." The third gong tolled. Mateo wondered if Vittoria was waiting outside yet. There was a specific spot set aside for her where Bernat could keep her safe from the landowners. "Honor awaits," Balta said. The fourth gong answered. Mateo's stomach felt watery. Not much frightened him, but the unknown had always had a wary hold on him. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, trying to slow his heart rate to no avail. The test of courage was bad enough as stated, but he knew there would be a twist. Something tossed at them at the last moment. His instincts were already prickling. The final gong sounded. "Honor to you, brother," Mateo murmured. Romeo ignored him and strode into the arena. Cheers filled the air as Romeo appeared at the mouth of the tunnel, in the small section of arena that remained free of the jungle. He spread his arms in acknowledgement of the crowd's support. Sunshine broke across his face as he spun, encompassing all with a fierce smile. The thunderous sound of his adoring public shook the ground. Mateo paused, allowing it to run for several more seconds. Then he slipped into the arena, ignoring the onslaught of low jeers. Instead, his gaze flickered to the top left. A glass dome surrounded a small, square area where Vittoria could sit. It lay empty. His stomach twisted. Why wasn't she here already? For a moment, he felt panic. Was something wrong? Had she come to harm? He slowed his heart by sheer force of will. No, he couldn't do this. He trusted Banat to get her here safely. Focus, he told himself. Focus. Romeo stood a few paces away. He held out a hand. Honor to you, brother. No doubt the observation of the public had something to do with his sudden willingness to exchange honor. Mateo clasped Romeo's upper arm and nodded. They parted an instant later. 2 machetes stood in the ground only a pace or 2 away. Romeo grabbed the one marked in blue, glanced back at his crowd with a wave, then headed into the jungle to the left. Mateo paused to gather his bearings. He ripped the yellow-marked machete out of the earth and studied everything he could see. The sun warmed his back. Shadows had moved across the doorway of the tunnel as he'd waited inside, which put the direction he was facing as east. Why it mattered, he didn't know, but he oriented himself all the same. A quick glance confirmed that Vittoria still hadn't arrived. Or, if she hadn't shown herself. Landowners hissed at him as he turned to face the southern edge of the arena. Romeo had turned north. The jungle was sparser there, allowing a little more sunlight. Better visuals, for sure. Less chance that something could be hiding in the shadows, ready to spring. Now, Mateo thought. Go now. He had already waited too long. The landowners started to shout at him. Honorless, they chanted. Honorless. A ripple of movement caught his eye. Mateo looked up to see Vittoria rush to the glass wall and press her hands against it. Her lips moved. Banat stepped up behind her with a firm nod to Mateo. Mateo could barely see them from this far away, but he thought he caught his name on her lips. Bolstered, he nodded once to her. She clung to the glass for a moment. There was no farewell in her gaze. Only heart, courage, bravery, light. Everything he needed to prod him into the darkness. Mateo shouldered the machete and moved south. Mateo stumbled on a tree root for the 1,000th time, caught himself with the tip of the machete, and glanced down. He rolled his eyes at the sight of the squished, slimy little bloodsucker that had tripped him. The length of his thumb and twice as wide, bloodsuckers congregated on tree roots after crawling out of the soil, as if they could suck blood from the sap. They made the ground slippery as soap, too. Mateo reached down, pulled another one off his ankle, and chucked it into the forest. He paused to try to gain his bearings, skin sweaty and clothes already damp from the baking heat. The jungle was oddly calm, although some of the usual animal life remained. The gentle caw of a bright daw bird, with its rainbow-colored feathers and ebony beak, the shuffle of something in the underbrush, then a little trill of song. Talking birds meant no predators nearby. Better to keep moving. He couldn't be quiet on the ground, and any movement spread his scent, so he gripped the machete in his teeth and scaled the closest tree. Vines abounded, but there wasn't enough strong tree branches to make this easy. Ghost panthers, if he remembered right, preferred solid ground even though their claws allowed them to climb any tree. The ivy repulsed them, he'd once heard, but that seemed unlikely. Ivy draped ground, tree, and sky here, so they'd run from everything. Carefully, and with precision, Mateo moved through the trees. He felt no rush. Didn't matter who found their ghost panther first, just that they found it. Besides, the panthers wouldn't be active now. Too warm. Mateo stayed high as often as possible. He shuffled across the ground only when he needed to study the jungle from a new vantage, or to cross a stretch of the arena that lacked supportive trees. The trees grew close as braids here, the vines clustering with thick abandon. It wasn't difficult to move up high. By instinct, he plunged into the darkest part of the arena, but stayed close to a quiet stream because everything had to drink. After testing a vine to make sure it would hold his weight, he swung across an unusually open spot of ground, caught another vine on the other side, and clung to a tree with his free hand. His shoulders burned like fire after hours of such physical exertion, but he pressed on. Except now the jungle had fallen silent. Mateo found a foothold and a better grip. Such stillness felt at odds with so much teeming life. Even the flies seemed to have fled. No sound met his ears, not even the revel of the landowners, likely chanting for his death. Nothing. The slightest flicker of movement drew his gaze to the right. Verdant life abounded everywhere here. Emerald leaves set in a backdrop of black made it impossible to tell what was really watching him. Shadows were a natural result of such packed space, But what he saw now was moving blackness. Mateo held his breath when the slinking, steady shadow passed behind several tall bushes. The blackness moved to the left, as if circling him, then paused. If he hadn't known any better, he would have guessed that embodied darkness was following him. But he knew. A ghost panther had finally arrived. And now, he realized his folly. Finding the animal wasn't the issue. Eventually, he was destined to meet it. The arena was big, but not that big. The problem was taking the panther alive to Balta without magic. He should have spent more time planning what he'd do when he found the beast. This might not even be the panther he should claim. But now that he had a chance, how to win? The shifting shadow stopped moving. A pair of blood-red eyes blinked as they assessed the area. The shine of a black nose reflected in the dim light of the jungle as the panther sniffed. The movement brought its head out of the foliage and into Mateo's line of sight. Though its coat was deep black, flashes of lighter, circular rosettas were just visible in the right light, like an overlay of black on top of a regular panther. Mateo slowly let out his breath, not daring to move. That's when he registered one very important detail. There was no collar, yellow or blue, tied around its neck. A moment of confusion preceded a gentle scratching sound, then a squawk. A flash of yellow at the ghost panther's feet drew Mateo's gaze down. His heart nearly stopped. A squabbly little whelp, likely no older than a month, laced itself between its mare's thick legs. Around its neck was a wound cloth of bright yellow. Seconds later, another whelp tumbled into sight with a scream the mare ignored. It wore the blue collar. He felt the realization like a cold fist to the stomach. By honor, but he and Romeo had to take ghost panther whelps. Somehow, he had to get past her to get the whelp. The mare tilted her head back, sniffing. She seemed to smell him, but hadn't found him yet. She focused her attention on the ground, as he'd suspected. That would change in moments, he had no doubt. Mateo clutched the tree tighter. A bloodsucker inched closer to him, one antenna on the tip of his finger. The sensation of a needle prick distracted Mateo only momentarily, but he didn't flick the bloodsucker free in case the movement or sound drew the mare's attention. The mare swung her large head toward him. A moment later, the family of ghost panthers disappeared. It didn't take long to comprehend why. Romeo stumbled into the small clearing, machete held out, at the very spot the mare had just vacated. The ground would still be warm from her paw print, but Romeo wouldn't pay attention to details like that. Mateo dropped to the ground. Romeo jumped, whirled his machete toward his brother, then relaxed slightly. "Just saw them," Mateo said, gesturing to where Romeo was standing with a nod. "They were right there. We're to take 2 whelps." Romeo paled. "What?" "Listen, without magic, we'll never do this alone. The whelps are young, maybe a month old. Their mare is going to be fierce, and we don't stand a chance." Mateo glanced at the bloodsucker on the tip of his finger. "But I have an idea, and it could work if we do it together." Romeo studied him. Without having seen the sheer size of the ghost panther, would Romeo be able to appreciate the odds against them? Besides, Balta had said nothing about what would happen if he or Romeo interfered with the other's panther. A truly ruthless opponent would kill the mare and the other ghost panther whelp, then take their own. Working together could be a fast track for a betrayal. But Mateo saw no other way. He waited. "You could betray me and let the ghost panther kill me." "Same, brother." Romeo grunted. "But I doubt you'd stake something as valuable as your honor on it," Mateo continued. "Together or not?" Romeo's jaw tightened. Mateo could see the moving thoughts in his eyes. No doubt he was considering the likelihood of killing the mare himself. "You have a plan?" Mateo flicked the bloodsucker free and tapped his bloody finger against his palm. He tilted his head back to study the trees. "Yes, something like that. It's not perfect, but it's something." Finally, what felt like an eternity later, Romeo reluctantly nodded. "Together." An hour later, Mateo silently cursed his own stupidity and spat out another mouthful of dirt back onto the jungle floor. Romeo was just visible on the highest branch of a tree near the whispering stream. Mateo stood in the running water, digging bloodsuckers out of the rich ground where his smell wouldn't linger. The bloodsuckers populated like leaves when he didn't need them, and now disappeared like magic once he did. 6 bloodsuckers hung off his arm, filling their disgusting bodies with his blood. One of them, engorged, nearly dropped back into the stream. He snatched it before it disappeared in the water, then cut its head off with a machete and placed it on a rock near the edge. A subtle break in the thick foliage likely indicated a spot that animals had come to drink before. Then he stepped on it. Blood squelched beneath his shoe, shooting straight out in an arc that spread droplets at least 4 paces away. This place would look, and smell, like a murder scene. Not far away, just down the stream, Romeo stared into the jungle canopy with his hands on his hips, looking for a branch to hide on and a path to get up the tree to it. They were still near the spot where Mateo had spotted the mare. Mateo assumed she'd prowled here before. 2 suckling whelps would guarantee a return visit to the stream at some point, because nursing mares were thirsty. She wasn't likely to travel too far with the whelps, and the smell of blood would draw any of them faster than water, which was just when Mateo would pounce. He foresaw 2 scenarios here. The first had the whelps running to the stream when they smelled the bloody bloodsuckers, and Mateo and Romeo could grab them and run for their lives ahead of the mare. In the second, the mare smelled the bloodsuckers and drew the whelps closer to her. Mateo would drop on the mare, Romeo would grab the whelps, and they'd hope Mateo figured out a way to subdue her. Blood dribbled down Mateo's arm. He let it drip to the jungle floor. Another bloodsucker fell off. He grabbed it, repeated the beheading process, and pitched it into the dirt a few paces away. When the bloodsuckers were all finished, a trail of blood led to the stream bank. His head spun a little as he stood up, but he shook it off. Romeo whistled once to indicate he was ready. Mateo glanced up, able to see Romeo only because he knew where he'd be. The jungle hid him from sight. But would his smell fade? Would the mare come back this way? 1,000 questions plagued him, but he shoved them away. It had to be enough. They'd figure it out later if they had to. Mateo reached for a vine dangling over the stream and pulled himself onto the closest branch. It was flimsy, but held his weight as he went a bit higher. He climbed carefully, allowing blood to trickle down his arm and onto the ground. Once he reached the overhanging branch he'd already picked out, he crouched. His stomach churned at the thought of what lay ahead, so he pushed it out of his mind. Didn't think about the ghost panther, about dropping from the trees, about how he'd subdued the mare without killing her, because why kill a mare with whelps? Nor did he think about a sudden, intense rush of thirst that tickled the back of his throat. 20 minutes passed. 30. Maybe an eternity. His pulse slowed only slightly as he waited, not daring to breathe. Sweat trickled down his face and along his spine. His shirt was soaked through. The darkness began to fall in earnest. The sun would be higher in the sky than it appeared now, because the jungle's dense canopy cast early shadows, but night would come soon, and panthers could see at night. Mateo might not even know he'd died until he woke up on the other side with fate, honor, or the givers. His heightened nerves kept his body tense and on edge. He wondered if Romeo felt the same dreadful anticipation. Then he heard a yowl. In the growing shadows, he could just make out the movement of a small figure and a flash of yellow. Another flash of blue followed. The whelps tumbled over each other not far away. Then one of them stopped. It pressed its nose to the ground, then seemed to catch the scent of his blood. The baby panther raced forward, tripped over its own feet, and tumbled into a dead bloodsucker. The whelps mauled it, all snapping teeth and angry growls. Mateo's heart raced. He should drop, grab the whelp, and dart away as fast as possible before the mare appeared. It was possible she'd let them venture ahead, so this could be his only chance. But not knowing where the mare was kept him on the branch a few moments longer. He shifted ever so slightly. The whelps, distracted by the second dead bloodsucker, had no idea he was hovering a few paces away. He thought he heard the rustle of a branch. Romeo, likely. Until he heard a low, throaty purr just behind him. Mateo sucked in a sharp breath. Slowly, he looked back over his shoulder. The glow of crimson eyes hovered in the darkness just behind his branch. He swallowed hard, face to face with the mare, the slap of her rancid breath like a death knell. "Romeo!" he shouted. "Now!" The mare lunged. Mateo sprang off the branch, leaping away from the whelps, and grabbed whatever ivy he could wrap his hands around. He tumbled to the ground. The tangled ivy slowed his fall, so he didn't break a leg, but he did lose his breath. The mare slinked out of the tree behind him with a hiss, moving like vapor. She pounced, ears back, coming within a pace of his ankle with the gleaming talons of her right claw. Her scream set his hair on edge. Mateo scrambled out of her reach as Romeo streaked behind him, grabbed both whelps, and disappeared into the trees. The mare leapt again. Mateo rolled as her claws slammed into the dirt where he'd just been lying. The ivy wrapped around his body, tangling his throat, but he leaped to his feet anyway and landed in a crouch. The mare advanced with a swipe, but moved back. She twitched, nose jerking back and forth. There was something in the smell of the ivy she didn't like. It hadn't been a legend. "Your babies have been taken from you once already for those stupid collars, mare," he whispered soothingly. "I get it. No wonder you hate us. But I swear no harm will come to them. Just afford me this one chance to save my network." At the sound of his voice, she shrank back for a second. He rustled the ivy and she recoiled, then screamed. He felt her third attack more than saw it, and although he ducked and avoided her teeth, her paw chuffed him on the side of the head. Mateo crashed to the ground, ears ringing. His mind moved slowly. He saw her blood-red eyes, smelled the metallic breath of death, sensed her looming over him. At the last second, he rolled onto his back, threw his left arm in the air, and felt something close on it instead of his head. Teeth sank into his forearm. The bones cracked, sending pain through his body like an earthquake. Mateo shouted, rolled with whatever momentum he could muster, and used all the power in his body to stand. The unexpected movement threw the panther off balance. They both stumbled, but she didn't release him. Her teeth shredded his arm and jerked on the broken bone. Mateo growled. He kicked at her to jar her concentration, but she sidestepped, crimson eyes focused on him, until the terrified scream of one of her whelps issued through the air. Startled, she released her grip for half a second to look up. Mateo wrenched his arm out, ducked, and threw himself behind her. Half blind with pain, he launched himself onto her back, gripped her body with his legs, and hooked his right arm around her neck. The panther thrashed and screamed, but Mateo clung to her. He felt the edge of her jaw against his hand, the strain of his right arm as he tightened his grip. Tightened, tightened. Every jerk of her thrashing body sent agony through his broken arm. He tried to brace it along his body, but that hurt worse. Twice he almost passed out. Twice the night seemed to have overcome him, but he brought himself back before his grip loosened. 3 times he overcame the urge to use magic to deepen his hold. Wheezy and weakened, the panther eventually slowed, struggling under his weight. Mateo pulled tighter with a yell, his face pressed into her rough fur. She canted to the right, her neck jerked, her tail whipped around. They slammed into a tree, and he held on. With the sheer power that comes only from certain death, his good arm held until the panther's front legs collapsed. Her ear twitched, and her face went slack. He loosened his grip slightly with a bolt of panic. No, he didn't want her to die and leave those beautiful whelps abandoned. His arm unwound. He pressed an ear to her chest. The faint thump of a heartbeat responded. Passed out, not dead yet, but soon awake. Mateo struggled to his feet with a shout of agony. Heat streaked through his arm with pulsing pain. The world swam. By sheer willpower, he kept himself from passing out. He leaned against a tree, yelled himself awake again, and forced his feet to move. Blood gushed over his arm. It felt sticky on his fingers, hot on his already hot skin. "Romeo!" he yelled, half blind from the pain. "Romeo!" His mind spun. Had Romeo abandoned him? Taken the whelps, doomed him to certain death? The mare would awaken any moment now. Was there more honor in victory if Mateo died for Romeo? Surely... Mateo fell to his knees. Breathing hard, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. "Romeo!" Out of the night came a simple voice. "Here." Mateo stopped and blinked several times before the picture clarified. Romeo stood in a rough animal trail, 2 squalling whelps dangling by the scruffs of their necks. Red slashes dotted his arms and face. His shirt was clawed to ribbons, but the whelps seemed calm now. They growled, occasionally batting with a paw, but were mostly docile. The unreadable expression on Romeo's face caught Mateo's attention, even through the pain. Romeo held out the yellow-collared whelp. "So?" Mateo panted. He grimaced as another spiral of pain wound all the way to his shoulder. "You didn't betray me." "I wouldn't say that," Romeo drawled, his face darkening. "Let's just say I owe you something." With that, Romeo spun on his heels and disappeared into the jungle. "Honor awaits," Mateo muttered to his whelp.